Donald Trump needs a beautiful new building to hold his magnificent balls. So why is the lunatic left trying to castrate this totally free taxpayer-funded project? Well, I've been watching Fox News for 250 hours straight, and I'm ready to explain why America's #1 priority is Donald Trump's golden palace of dance. Donald Trump has spent years calling himself a genius, a stable genius, a man with one of the highest IQs in politics, and every time pressure closes in around him, the claim comes back louder. Like repeating it enough times should end the conversation before anybody asks for proof. But this time, something felt different, because the response didn't come from a courtroom. It didn't come from a rival politician. It didn't even come from a journalist. It came from a late-night comedy desk. And somehow, that made it worse. Because when politicians attack Trump, his supporters expect it. When reporters criticize him, his base dismisses it. But when millions of people start laughing at the exact same weakness all at once, that sticks. And Desi Lydic understood that perfectly. She didn't scream, she didn't rage, she didn't deliver some emotional anti-Trump monologue. She smiled. And then she dismantled the entire myth in under 2 minutes. You know, I believe it or not, I watch my words very carefully. There are those that think I'm a very stable genius, okay? I watch my words very, very closely, and to have somebody get up and to totally fabricate a conversation that I had with another leader. At first, the audience laughed the way late-night audiences always laugh, but then Desi paused. And what she said next completely changed the energy in the room. Because she didn't challenge Trump's intelligence directly, she challenged something much more dangerous, his obsession with proving it. She leaned forward slightly and said, "The funniest thing about Trump calling himself a genius is that no actual genius has ever needed customer support for their own ego 24 hours a day." The audience lost it, not because it was loud, not because it was shocking, because it felt true. And that's the moment this stopped being another comedy segment and started turning into something bigger online. Clips exploded across social media. People replayed the line again and again. Comment sections filled instantly, not arguing, not debating, just posting. Damn. Because deep down, even people who supported Trump had seen the pattern for years. Every criticism becomes betrayal. Every fact check becomes a conspiracy. Every uncomfortable question becomes a personal attack. And suddenly people weren't asking, "Is Trump smart?" They were asking something far more uncomfortable. Why does a man who constantly calls himself a genius seem terrified of being questioned? That question spread everywhere. And once it started spreading, it became impossible to ignore. I got to say, Donald Trump has proven himself surprisingly limber for a man with those cankles, because in just the last 24 hours alone, he's achieved 2 new lows. First, you know how Donald Trump has always sued everyone and everything at all times everywhere. That line hit too because people immediately recognized the pattern. Trump doesn't just defend himself, he counterattacks constantly. Always. Someone criticizes him? They're corrupt. Someone disagrees with him? They're a loser. Someone questions him? Suddenly there's a rant, a nickname, a lawsuit threat, or a 3-hour online meltdown at 2 a.m. And Desi Lydic carefully connected all of it back to one central point. Confidence doesn't usually need this much maintenance. That's when she brought up Einstein. And the comparison made the audience howl. She said, "If Einstein behaved like Trump, every physics lecture would end with him screaming about ratings, crowd sizes, and fake newspapers conspiring against relativity." Again, huge laughter. But underneath the joke was something sharper. Because she wasn't mocking intelligence. She was mocking insecurity disguised as intelligence. And that distinction mattered. A lot. Then came the line that really detonated online. Lydic said, "Trump treats intelligence the way influencers treat filters. Not as something you naturally demonstrate, but something you constantly apply before people notice the cracks underneath." Silence. Then explosions of laughter. And the reason that line spread so fast was because people instantly visualized it. The branding, the performance, the constant self-advertisement. I'm smart. I'm a genius. I know more than the generals. I know more than the economists. I know more than the doctors. Over and over and over again. Until eventually people stop hearing confidence and start hearing panic. That was the shift. And suddenly even older Trump clips started looking different. People began revisiting interviews they'd seen 100 times before. The strange detours, the rambling answers, the random grudges inserted into unrelated topics, the inability to simply answer a direct question cleanly. Stephen Colbert noticed it too. And when he jumped in, the conversation became even harder to escape. because Colbert framed it in a way that sounded almost clinical. He said, "The strange thing about Trump's genius claim is that every difficult question seems to trigger an emergency evacuation route inside his brain." That line spread instantly, too, because everyone knew exactly what he meant. An interview starts about healthcare. Suddenly, Trump is talking about television ratings, then crowd sizes, then Biden, then windmills, then a celebrity he hates, then a story from 1987 nobody asked for. And by the end, the original question is buried somewhere under 15 minutes of verbal smoke bombs. Colbert continued, "A truly brilliant person can usually survive a direct question without needing 6 detours and a conspiracy theory before reaching the period at the end of the sentence." The audience erupted, but online, people were doing something more dangerous than laughing. They were comparing clips, and once viewers start comparing patterns, you lose control of the narrative. That's when Desi Lydic delivered the line, "People still could not stop replaying." She looked directly into the camera and said, "Trump talks about IQ the same way teenage boys talk about bench press numbers. Loudly, constantly, and usually without anybody asking." The room exploded. But what made the moment devastating wasn't the joke itself. It was how calm she stayed. No anger, no dramatic outrage, no emotional screaming, just calm dissection. Like someone slowly removing bricks from a tower while the audience realizes the whole thing might collapse. And suddenly people notice something uncomfortable. Trump rarely talks about intelligence through actions. He talks about it through declarations. That difference became the center of the entire conversation. Because genuinely intelligent people usually don't need hourly reminders about how intelligent they are. Their work does the talking. Their composure does the talking. Their consistency does the talking. But Trump's version always sounded more like branding, a slogan, a product label. Stable genius. Even the phrase itself started sounding strange once people stepped back and really heard it. Who says that about themselves? And more importantly, why keep repeating it for years? That question started haunting the entire discussion. Then things got even worse for Trump when old clips resurfaced again. People started stitching together compilations. Every time he bragged about his IQ. Every time he claimed unmatched intelligence. Every time he said nobody knows more than him about something completely random. Technology, military strategy, economics, infrastructure, medicine, water pressure, sharks, batteries. The compilations became endless. And the internet did what the internet always does. It turned repetition into comedy. But then, Desi shifted the tone completely. And this is where the segment stopped being funny for a lot of viewers. Because she moved away from jokes and into something more psychological. She said, "Real intelligence isn't about branding yourself as the smartest person in every room. It's about judgment, discipline, curiosity, patience, the ability to hear criticism without publicly melting down at 3 a.m. The laughter softened. Because suddenly people weren't just thinking about Trump anymore. They were thinking about every moment they'd watched him react under pressure, every late-night rant, every furious post, every all-caps response. Every moment criticism seemed to wound him personally in ways bigger than actual crises. And then came the line that hit hardest of all. The real test of intelligence is whether someone can admit mistakes, adapt when proven wrong, and learn something new without treating disagreement like a personal attack. That changed everything. Because viewers instantly started mentally replaying years of moments. Moments where experts became enemies simply for disagreeing. Moments where correction became humiliation. Moments where doubling down mattered more than reality itself. And suddenly the conversation wasn't about IQ anymore. It was about emotional stability. And that's where things became genuinely uncomfortable. Because intelligence without emotional control stops looking impressive very quickly. Colbert pushed even further. He argued that Trump accidentally created an impossible standard for himself. Every time Trump says the word genius, people naturally start measuring the behavior surrounding it. Does he stay calm under pressure? Does he answer clearly? Does he show consistency? Does he demonstrate curiosity? Can he tolerate criticism? And according to Colbert, the more Trump repeats the word genius, the more closely people start looking for evidence that contradicts it. That's the trap. And once audiences notice the trap, they can't unsee it. Then something happened nobody expected. Even conservative commentators started sounding uneasy. Not because they suddenly turned against Trump, but because the clips were becoming impossible to defend without sounding ridiculous. One commentator tried brushing it off as comedy, but even he admitted, honestly, Trump probably should stop talking about IQ altogether, because every time he does, it becomes the entire story. Exactly. That was the problem. The brag itself becomes the headline. Not the policy, not the strategy, not the accomplishment, the insecurity. And that's the word people kept circling back to, insecurity. Because confidence and insecurity can sometimes sound weirdly similar at first. Both can be loud, both can be aggressive, both can dominate rooms. But eventually there's a difference. Real confidence gets quieter under pressure. Insecurity gets louder. And critics argued Trump was getting louder than ever. Then came the moment nobody saw coming. A reporter asked Trump a relatively simple question during another appearance. Nothing hostile, nothing aggressive. But halfway through answering, Trump suddenly pivoted into another rant about how underestimated he is intellectually. And online, people immediately connected it back to Desi's joke. Within minutes, the clips were side by side. Millions of views, one after another after another. The timing was brutal, because now every new defense sounded like proof of the original criticism. And Trump walked directly into it, again and again and again. That's when viewers started noticing something deeper underneath the comedy. Trump doesn't just want victory, he wants validation. Constant validation. Public validation. Endless validation. And once audiences detect that hunger, every reaction starts looking different. Every outburst feels more personal. Every boast feels more desperate. Every grievance sounds less strategic and more emotional. That realization changed the entire atmosphere online, because people stopped debating whether Trump was smart and started debating why he needed everyone to believe it so badly. That's a much harder conversation to control, especially when comedians weaponize simplicity against you, because the most devastating jokes are usually the shortest ones. And Desi Lydic understood that perfectly. No long speech, no complicated argument, just one devastating observation after another. Tiny cuts. But together, they bled the image dry. Then the internet delivered the final twist. People started posting clips of genuinely brilliant public figures being challenged. Scientists, professors, CEOs, historians. And viewers noticed something fascinating. Most of them reacted calmly. Some admitted uncertainty. Some corrected themselves. Some even laughed at mistakes. They didn't explode. They didn't spiral. They didn't scream about enemies conspiring against them. And the comparison became impossible to ignore. Because intelligence usually looks comfortable with complexity. It doesn't panic every time reality becomes inconvenient. That contrast quietly destroyed the entire conversation Trump had tried building around himself for years. And the worst part? The late-night hosts barely needed to exaggerate anything. Most of the material came directly from Trump himself. His own clips, his own words, his own reactions. That's what made the segment so lethal. It didn't feel manufactured. It felt assembled. Like someone simply arranging puzzle pieces people had already seen separately for years. And once assembled, the picture became difficult to unsee. By the end of the night, one clip in particular dominated social media. Not the loudest joke, not the harshest insult, just Desi calmly saying, "No actual genius spends this much time begging strangers to acknowledge it." That line landed like a brick, because suddenly viewers weren't laughing at a politician anymore. They were watching a man trapped inside his own branding, a man who built such an enormous image of superiority that now he has to constantly defend it every single day. And maybe that's the real reason the jokes hit so hard. Not because people believe Trump is stupid, but because deep down, they suspect truly intelligent people don't need to keep announcing it over and over and over again. And once that suspicion enters people's minds, every new outburst becomes evidence. Every rant becomes confirmation. Every boast sounds less like strength and more like someone trying desperately to convince himself first. And that may be the most damaging punchline of all.